I've got a family now, so I'm getting a divorce. Take the kid and get out. Oh, and just so you know, I won't pay a dime in compensation." Next to Greg, Susan was nodding in agreement. Their attitudes seemed to suggest that I was the one who was mistaken. Only the babies and the strollers, unaware of anything, slept peacefully. Greg didn't help at all. When Emma was born, he spent his days playing around. Eventually, he even started dipping into Emma's school funds, despite never fulfilling his duties as a father. Greg got to enjoy himself and start a new family. Did he ever consider how Emma and I felt? As various thoughts raced through my mind and left me unable to speak, Emma pointed to the TV that had been left on and said, aren't you watching TV, Dad?" At her words, Greg ended up yelling loudly, "My name is Jennifer Hansen. I am a housewife in my 50s. I live with my husband, Greg, and my daughter, Emma. I met Greg after graduating from college at the company, where we both started working as fresh graduates. Is there something stuck? If you don't understand something, don't hesitate to ask. I was actually assigned a different senior with more experience as my mentor. However, seeing me tense and unable to speak, well, it was Greg who approached me. Greg patiently explained the things I was stuck on, and from then on, I naturally began to ask him about various things. As time went by, we quickly grew closer. Eventually, Greg confessed his feelings to me. "I fell for your dedication to your work. Would you like to date me?" I'd love to, since I had feelings for Greg as well. We started dating and quickly got married. A few years later, we were blessed with Emma. However, it wasn't always fun and games. In fact, it would be no exaggeration to say that there were many painful days. The cause was Greg's infidelity. It was around the time I got pregnant with Emma. Until then, Greg had cherished me deeply. When he learned of my pregnancy, he even teared up and said, "Thank you." I had severe morning sickness, and the smell of food alone made me nauseous. After the wedding, upon Greg's insistence, I had quit my job. Greg was up for a promotion at the time, so I accepted his request. As a full-time housewife, I was in charge of all the household chores. Being at home, I felt it was only natural to do so. But cooking in such a poor physical condition was indeed painful. Hey, I'm sorry to ask, but could we eat out or buy ready-made meals for a while? It was difficult to say that as someone tasked with the household duties, but I gathered the courage and approached Greg, who was relaxing in the living room. Greg frowned for a moment and asked in a serious tone, "Why? You're a housewife, aren't you? You're not working, so you have to do the household chores properly. Otherwise, you're just a leech." Indeed, what Greg said was true. After all, I was living on Greg's money. It was only fair to expect me to do the household chores in return. But I couldn't do what I couldn't do, and it wasn't that I was being lazy. Desperately, I tried to convey my feelings to Greg. "I feel nauseous from the morning sickness. Just smelling food makes me want to throw up. Really, it's hard to do any household chores when my belly is so heavy and uncomfortable." "Shut up. That's just an excuse. You're a housewife, so do your household chores properly. How will you take care of me if you keep up with such a diet? It's your job to think about nutritional balance and prepare meals full of love to welcome your husband." Overwhelmed by his harsh words, I felt dizzy on the spot. I wasn't asking for his help every day, but Greg could have helped a bit with the chores on his days off, just like he relaxed in the living room. No matter how desperately I tried to convey my feelings, Greg wouldn't listen. So, enduring my heavy belly and nausea, I managed to get the household chores done. It was a continuous struggle, but still, when Emma was born, I felt as if those painful days were finally over. At the same time, I was moved by the sight of Emma crying in the delivery room. Greg, saying he had work, didn't come to the hospital or even respond to my calls. Seeing his behavior, the nurses also seemed somewhat uncomfortable. But while holding Emma, I could forget all the unpleasantness. I decided from the bottom of my heart to protect this child. For the rest of my life, I would make sure she lived without hardship, no matter what. As expected, Greg didn't participate in parenting at all. To ensure I had enough funds to raise Emma, I put her in daycare and started working from home. Of course, I had discussed this with Greg. What kind of job can an old lady with no skills do from home? It's almost like playing. It won't earn much, but do whatever you like. Without even listening to what the job entailed, Greg mocked me. Honestly, it was frustrating. But now I just use that feeling as motivation to work hard. Daddy, play with me. Greg was just relaxing in the living room as usual on his days off, and Emma sometimes called out to him. If it were me, I would have smiled and played with her right away. But Greg looked annoyed and shooed her away. Daddy is busy. I don't have time to play with you. Ask Mom to play. Saying that, he quickly got ready and left. Lately, I had noticed that Greg's outings had increased. Not just on weekends, but even on weekdays, he seemed to come home later. I checked the salary details, but there was no sign of overtime. Having worked there myself, I knew the company didn't demand excessive unpaid overtime. Could it be an affair? That thought crossed my mind, and I immediately hired a detective. It turned out that Greg was indeed involved in an affair with another woman. Greg, Emma is here too. What are you thinking? This is unacceptable for a father. Let's get a divorce. Filled with anger, I thrust the divorce papers at him. However, trying to appease me, Greg said, "Divorce is the only thing." And what about Emma? If she grows up without a father from such a young age, it could affect her personality. Honestly, I was worried about that. If we divorced now, Emma would end up being raised by a single parent. Even if it didn't affect her personality, she could be teased at school. But that didn't calm my anger. It seemed we would definitely end up divorcing. However, something made me reconsider the divorce. It was Emma sleep-talking, "Daddy, let's play," while breathing softly in her sleep. Emma murmured this in a small voice. Since Greg's affair had been discovered, there had been a tense atmosphere in the house. Emma must have sensed it somehow. Even so, this child was still seeking her father. Overwhelmed by her bravery, I felt tears fall and was disgusted with myself for nearly taking her father away from her in my anger. I decided that when Emma no longer needed a father, that would be the time for divorce. I resolved to demand a higher than usual compensation from the affair partner and set a condition for Greg to spend time with Emma once a week, and decided not to divorce. It turned out that Greg had covered the affair partner's compensation payment, but that didn't matter to me as long as both were hit hard. That was enough. After that, Greg did indeed spend time with Emma once a week as promised. However, it didn't last long. I felt like complaining that this wasn't what we had agreed upon, but since our relationship had been repaired and we were no longer fighting daily, I couldn't bear to dredge up the past and make Emma suffer again. Time just passed, and we entered our 50s. Emma, who we had cherished so much, had turned 20, found a job, and was living on her own. Greg had been on a solo assignment overseas for the past 3 years, so I ended up spending time alone at home. Concerned about me, Emma had been living at home even after getting a job. Since his solo assignment, Greg rarely showed his face at home. Gradually, Greg's presence faded from our lives. That day was Emma's day off from work, and we were leisurely spending time watching TV and eating snacks. Then the doorbell rang. Yes, when I checked, there stood Greg and a young blonde woman holding a stroller. At a glance, she seemed about Emma's age. Twin babies were sleeping soundly in the stroller. Not understanding what was going on just from the video, I hesitantly opened the front door to let them in. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. I'm Susan Holmes. I've been seeing Greg." Her words stunned me. This man had betrayed his family, not just once but twice, and this time with someone as young as his daughter. The fact that a man in his 50s was doting on such a young partner was unbelievable to the point of making me nauseous. Seeing me speechless, Greg probably felt the shock and said with a shallow smile, "I've got a family now, so I'm getting a divorce. Take the kid and get out. Oh, and just so you know, I won't pay a dime in compensation." "Oh, Greg, that's terrible." Greg and Susan both looked at me, unable to say anything, and seemed to be almost laughing at me. Only the sleeping babies in the stroller were oblivious, breathing peacefully. Their behavior reminded me of Emma's sleep talking from that time. However, as I was silently watching Emma suddenly pointed at the TV. "Huh, Dad, aren't you watching the TV?" At her words, everyone's gaze turned to the TV. The screen displayed a news headline, "Today's Hot Topic. The female CEO with rumored annual sales of $500 million. The camera switched to the interviewee. Seeing it, Greg suddenly shouted, "What does this mean? Why are you on the TV?" Yes, the female CEO being interviewed was me. After Emma started daycare, I began working from home. At first, it was really just small jobs, but as work began to pick up, I founded a company to help others like me find good projects. It was uncertain at first, but there seemed to be a demand, and business grew significantly. 2 years ago, it became a listed company. Now it's considered a dream company for those in the same field, with constant job applications and project requests. Explaining this, Greg's face turned pale. Susan, who was momentarily flustered, quickly tried to cover for him. "But Greg, you're making money too, right? Maybe not $500 million, but you said you're a department head and might be promoted soon." Hearing this, I couldn't help but say what it seemed that Greg had been telling tall tales to impress Susan. He's just an ordinary employee, though. What indeed, there have been talks of Greg's promotion at the beginning of our marriage. However, that prospect had since disappeared because Greg had embezzled company funds. Even if it was a small amount, embezzlement is embezzlement. Greg, crying over the terrible mistake he had made, seemed palpable to me, and I repeatedly apologized to the CEO and repaid several times the amount embezzled with interest, of course. The money came from my savings, thanks to a certain connection with the CEO who took pity on my desperate pleas. It was agreed that Greg would continue to be employed on the condition that he would never be promoted, no matter what. I'm truly grateful to the CEO, but I also feel like I made unnecessary efforts. In the end, Greg could not get promoted, so of course there was no chance he could become a department head. Probably he lied to make himself look better to Susan. When I exposed this, Susan's face turned pale. "Why did you lie about that? You weren't a department manager, just an ordinary employee. That's unbelievable." "I wouldn't have done this if I had known." Susan screamed as if she was having a tantrum, tears in her eyes. Greg also pleaded, "I had no choice. I just wanted to catch your attention, Susan. I really loved you." Watching 2 grown adults in such a meltdown was quite unsightly. Amidst this chaos, Emma came from her room with an envelope and spread its contents on the table. Actually, I knew Dad was cheating. Everyone present, including myself, gasped in surprise at Emma's words. According to her, the trigger was when Greg, who was supposed to be on a business trip abroad, was spotted by one of her friends within the country. After confirming that the person in the photos was indeed Greg, Emma immediately hired a detective to start an investigation. She explained the situation to my parents and managed to cover the costs. She decided to monitor Greg's movements, focusing on the locations where he had been spotted. This led to a plethora of evidence of his infidelity. However, she didn't have the heart to report it to me. What if it shocked me too much? Moreover, the person Greg was cheating with was almost the same age as her. I must have thought it would cause me great emotional distress, so she decided to wait and see. Amidst all this, such an incident occurred. Documents and photos indicating Greg and Susan's affair were laid out densely on the table. Seeing this, both of them turned red, but Emma continued to speak honestly. What Dad has done is despicable. Betraying Mom and secretly starting a family elsewhere is absolutely unforgivable. I barely have any memories of staying with him, but now I'm thoroughly disappointed. Emma must be feeling indescribable disgust. I too felt it was a waste to spend any more time on these people. I just wanted to settle things quickly. But for that, they needed to face some consequences. Of course, I plan to demand compensation, and on top of that, I'll have a word with the president. When I mentioned the president, Greg's face turned ashen. No wonder, the president refers to the head of the company where Greg works. If this matter comes to light, Greg, who has already caused trouble, will likely be fired this time. Wait, how can you even contact the president directly? You're just a former ordinary employee. You shouldn't have that kind of authority, Susan said. That normally, a mere former employee wouldn't be able to contact a company president directly. Why? I could do that has to do with my relationship with the president. My father and the president are childhood friends. At this, Greg and Susan both exclaimed in surprise. I had never told this to Greg. What do you mean? I've never heard about this. There's not much to it. My father has been friends with the president for a long time, which is why I was able to get a job at that company. Oh, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't a connection-based hiring, but it was also why I could do something when Greg embezzled funds. Though it was all in vain, I wonder what the president will think when he finds out how much his friend's daughter has been hurt. As I said this with exasperated calmness, Greg's face went from blue to pale white. That makes sense. If I speak to the president, Greg might be fired in no time. Already guilty of embezzlement, if he loses his current job, finding another one would likely be impossible. If that happens, he'll truly be lost since Susan alone probably couldn't support the twins and cover the entire family's living expenses. It would mean downfall for the whole family. What do you mean? I thought marrying you as a manager meant a secure future. If I thought I could live easily, what are you going to do about this now? Facing reality, Susan turned bright red and grabbed Greg by the collar. No surprise there, she thought it was a golden opportunity, but it turned out to be just a brard. While being shaken by Susan, Greg desperately tried to keep smiling. Of course, his face remained pale, but think about it, if we have love, we can overcome this, right? We have a family, we should pull together for a family. I believed we could do that with you, Susan. Such a poor attempt at persuasion, however, such sweet talk won't sway Susan. To Susan, it seems there was no real interest in Greg himself, just in the wealth she thought he had. Chances of a young woman genuinely falling for a man in his 50s are slim. Unless he looked somewhat appealing, Greg, with a belly befitting his age and a greasy look, would not be someone I'd date, even if I were younger. I'll never forgive you, no marriage. Make sure you pay child support. These kids are yours after all. What, weren't you going to marry me? This isn't what we agreed on. At Susan's words, Greg pleaded tearfully. But then Emma interjected. But those kids, are they even, Dad? What do you mean? Confused by Emma's words. I tilted my head. Then Emma pulled something else out of the envelope. It seemed there was still some evidence she hadn't shown yet. Ah, stop. As Emma revealed the item, Susan screamed piercingly and threw herself across the table. At that moment, a photo fluttered down. In the photo, Susan was seen walking in a hotel district with an unknown man. You were seeing another man besides Greg. What? My words. Greg snatched the photo from my hands. Seeing it, Greg's face turned red, and he yelled at Susan. What is this about? You're betraying me too, weren't you? I was seriously in love with you, Susan, and yet you go messing around with other men. It's not like that. It's not like that, shut up. Those kids probably aren't even mine. I won't acknowledge them as mine until we do a DNA test. At Greg's words, Susan started sobbing bitterly. If he delays submitting the divorce papers, I'll sue you. That will make finding a job even harder, won't it? How sad. And with compensation to pay, are you sure you'll be all right? At my words, Greg gasped on the other side of the phone. To twist the knife further, I added, oh, and about the president, he seemed angrier than I thought. It looks like he's spreading the word about you everywhere. Isn't that nice? You're not a celebrity. No, please do something. If that happens, I'm finished. Greg's voice was colored with despair. It was so amusing that I couldn't help but smile. But all of this is Greg's fault. Greg, who has betrayed Emma and me for years. Marrying Greg was probably a mistake in the first place. Why did I ever marry such a person? I deeply regret being attracted to Greg in my younger days. I don't know what to tell you. You brought this on yourself, right? I'm going to hang up now. I'll send you my lawyer's contact information later, so please communicate through them from now on. Goodbye. After Greg's plea, I hung up the phone. The ringtone sounded several more times, but I quickly blocked Greg's contact and sent only the lawyer information before blocking him. This way, Greg can no longer contact me. I decided to tell Emma to block his contact as well, feeling relieved that things were finally settled. What I heard from the lawyer later was that initially Greg hesitated to submit the divorce papers, but when he heard it might go to court, he submitted them quietly. However, the matter didn't end there. To pay the compensation to me, Greg borrowed a large sum of money from dubious sources. You might wonder why he would do that, but following this incident, his parents disowned him. Having already set things up with his friends, Greg had no one to turn to and ended up going to those people out of desperation. Though he managed to pay the compensation, he couldn't repay his debts and was eventually taken away by some shady characters. I heard through the grapevine that he's now working on a tuna fishing boat. I also demanded compensation from Susan. However, her parents ended up paying for it. I might have felt that it didn't impact her much, but her parents, furious about the incident, are now controlling all her income. Despite her youth, Susan cannot spend her salary freely, and her beauty is reportedly fading. Apparently, the babies from that time were not Greg's children after all. They are now being taken care of by Susan's parents. When I met them in the presence of a lawyer, they seemed like decent people, so I'm confident those twins will grow up just fine. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Since then, I've been leisurely going about my work days. Actually, Emma works as an office clerk at my company. Although she is my daughter, I don't show her any favoritism, but she is quite a competent employee, beloved by everyone in the office. One day, Emma said to me, I have something to tell you. Worried it might be some misconduct, my heart raced. But when I saw the young man standing next to her, my face softened. I've decided to get married, saying that, Emma blushed. As a parent, I feel I've caused her a lot of trouble. I've surely made her go through a lot of hard times. Yet hearing my daughter's happiest news, tears started to fall. Mom, you're getting ahead of yourself. That's for the wedding, right? Emma took out a handkerchief and wiped my tears. Seeing me cry embarrassingly, the young man beside her smiled and said, "What a wonderful mother." There were many times I wanted to run away from all the hardships, but I could overcome them because I had Emma. I intend to continue being a mother she can be proud of. To think she would cheat and possibly even try to trick him into raising another man's child. Despite being the same age as Emma, it was almost impressive how cunning she could be with the evidence of infidelity. Demanding compensation won't be a problem. It's unlikely that Greg and Susan can repair their relationship now. Just when I thought everything was settled, Greg suddenly started to prostrate himself. "What are you trying to do?" I asked. Greg cried out desperately. "I've realized only Jennifer is right for me. I love only Jennifer. I might not have been a good husband before, but I'll do better this time. Please, let's try again. I can't do it without you, Jennifer." What does he mean he can't do it without me? If that were true, he wouldn't have gone after Susan. Hearing him say this now doesn't move me at all. Sorry, but I have no intention of withdrawing the divorce. Emma and I will leave this house. I'll send the divorce papers by mail, so please sign them and submit them. With that, I returned to my room. Emma seemed to understand what she needed to do as well, and went back to her own room. After spending some time preparing our belongings, Susan and the baby were gone, but Greg was sobbing alone in the living room. "Please reconsider. Don't leave me alone." Despite his pleas, we ignored him completely. Emma and I left the house together. For the time being, we decided to stay in a hotel. Once we find a house, we'll move there immediately. The divorce papers have been sent, and I've already consulted a lawyer. If there's any delay in the submission of the divorce papers, we can consult about that too. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Emma was attending work as usual. Initially, I had suggested that we look for separate places, but apparently, Emma thinks I'm too lonely, saying, "Let's live together in the new house." I'm relying on Emma as we look for a new house, work, and sometimes go out together without the troublesome presence of Greg. I have more enjoyable time with Emma. This time is the first since I got married that I can enjoy various things wholeheartedly and without any worries. However, such happy times won't last forever. It was a weekday, and I was at the office. After confirming the day's schedule with my secretary, I began to tackle the day's work on my computer. During work, my smartphone started ringing loudly. It was Greg, of course. Since it was work hours, I couldn't answer. I always tried to keep work and private life separate, so I ignored it, and eventually, it stopped. But then it started ringing again. Once it stopped, it started again. It was a continuous cycle, so annoying. Annoyed by the constant disturbance, I decided to answer the still ringing calls. After returning to the hotel, it seems that looking at the call history, he had been calling continuously since I first noticed. Before I could say hello, I heard Greg's desperate cries, "Help, the house. I'm going to lose the house." Hearing Greg's words, I honestly sighed. Is that all? That's only natural, isn't it? After all, that house isn't in your name. Yes, the ownership of the house we had lived in as a family was in my name. To be exact, it was in both Greg's and my name when we signed the contract. However, after Greg embezzled money, and it became clear he wouldn't be promoted, we decided it would be difficult to continue mortgage payments. So we changed the title to my name. Thus, I have been the one paying for the mortgage alone since Greg contributed only a tiny amount. It was only natural to evict him if I no longer lived there. It's obvious, yet he didn't even realize that. It seems I have been too lenient with Greg for too long. If I had expressed my intentions more clearly, would the future have been different? After hearing my words, Greg seemed to recall those events and clung desperately. but it was pathetic. Do something. The president even announced I'm fired. If this continues, I'll lose not just my job, but my home too. How am I supposed to live? That's none of my concern. Why don't you figure it out yourself? This situation is entirely the result of Greg's own doing. If he hadn't betrayed our family, we could have continued living together, even if we were close. That he couldn't is entirely Greg's fault, yet he refuses to accept his sins and clings disgracefully. How can he continue to show such an appalling side of himself? Even though he shows such a state, I won't sympathize. For me, the relationship with Greg is over. Honestly, I'm so averse to dealing with him that I decide to end it clearly.
Laughter cut through the quiet, heavy air of the funeral home. My stepsister Olivia spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice full of hate. Look at her crying like she actually belongs here. Dad never even wanted her. I stood alone by my father's casket, gently placing my hand on it, trying not to cry. My name is Anna Mitchell, and at 32 years old, I was saying goodbye to the only parent who ever truly loved me. My stepmother Victoria walked over, her high heels clicking loudly on the floor. Her face wore a fake smile. "Emma, dear," she said, using the wrong name on purpose like she always had, "shouldn't you be helping with the food? That's more your style." I didn't correct her. My name is Anna, not Emma. I wasn't the help. I was James Mitchell's daughter. But Victoria had spent 20 years pretending I wasn't. She probably thinks she's getting something in the will, Olivia whispered to her brother Marcus. Like Dad would leave anything to the babysitter's kid. That's what they called my mom, the babysitter. But she had been my dad's first love. They were married for 8 years before she died. I was their wanted plan child. Victoria and her kids never cared about that. "I'm here to say goodbye to my father," I said quietly, holding back tears. "This isn't about money." Victoria laughed, cold and sharp. "Oh, sweetie, everything is about money. Why else do you think your father married me after your mother's little accident?" Her words hit me hard. Mom's car crash had shattered Dad and me. Then Victoria came in, acting like a kind neighbor. A year later, she and her kids moved into our house. Life was never the same. "Speaking of money," Marcus added, fixing his tie, "we should talk about the house. Olivia and I think it's time to sell. We'll be inheriting everything anyway." I looked at him and remembered when he first moved in at 13, asking me for help with homework. Now he was just like Victoria, cold, proud, and selfish. "The lawyer will be here soon," Victoria said, checking her gold watch. "He told me James gave clear instructions." Her tone made me uneasy. In the final months, when Dad was sick, she kept me away, saying he was too weak. My messages were ignored. My calls never returned. But I had one thing. A note. A small, worn piece of paper in my pocket. The last message Dad had passed to his nurse Sandra before Victoria fired her. "Tell Anna I love her. Tell her to be patient. Tell her to remember the lighthouse." The lighthouse. The place where we scattered Mom's ashes. Our special spot. We went there every year on her birthday, until Victoria stopped it, calling it too depressing. At noon, the lawyer, Mr. Patterson, walked in. His face looked serious as he placed his briefcase down. Victoria rushed to greet him, smiling like a perfect widow. "Shall we begin?" she asked sweetly. "The family is ready." He nodded, but his eyes found mine. He looked at me with something I couldn't quite name, maybe not pity, but something close. It made Victoria's smile falter. "Yes," he said, opening his briefcase. "Let's read James Mitchell's last will and testament." Olivia clutched Marcus's arm, excited. Victoria stood between them, one hand on each of their shoulders like they were a picture-perfect family. I stayed by the casket, holding Dad's note and his last words, "Be patient." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. The room went quiet. I thought about all the years I was pushed aside, treated like I didn't belong. "Before I begin," he said, "I should mention this will was updated 3 months ago, with very specific instructions." Victoria's smile grew. "Yes, James was always very detailed." "Let's hear it." The lawyer pulled out a thick envelope with a seal on it. "Very well," he said. "But I must warn you, this may surprise some of you. Victoria's hands tightened on her children's shoulders. Her smile faded just a bit. And for the first time since Dad died, I felt a small spark of hope. "Let's begin," said Mr. Patterson, breaking the seal, "with the last wishes of James Mitchell." "First," Mr. Patterson said clearly, "I need to explain why this will was changed. 3 months ago, James Mitchell asked to meet with me in private because he was worried about what was happening around him." Victoria's face turned pale. "What private meeting?" "I handled all of James' appointments while he was sick." "Not this one," Mr. Patterson replied. "The meeting was arranged with the help of his nurse, Sandra, before she was suddenly let go." My heart jumped. Sandra, the nurse who gave me Dad's final note. She had done more than I realized. "During that meeting," Mr. Patterson went on, "Mr. Mitchell gave me many documents, private recordings, bank records, medical reports." Olivia frowned. "What does any of that have to do with the will?" "Everything," Mr. Patterson said, pulling out another paper. "These records show a pattern of control. Phone calls were blocked, visitors turned away, and medical choices were made without the right process." Victoria stepped forward, clearly upset. "This is nonsense. I was protecting my husband when he was vulnerable. You were keeping him away from everyone," I said softly. "That's why I couldn't reach him." Mr. Patterson nodded. "Which brings us to the actual will. James Mitchell's entire estate, including the house, his investments, and all other property, will be placed in a trust." "A trust?" Marcus asked. "What kind of trust?" "The Mitchell Family Preservation Trust," Mr. Patterson answered, "with Anna Mitchell as the only trustee." The room exploded. Victoria lunged forward, furious. "This is a lie. He changed the will years ago. I saw it." "The paper you saw," Mr. Patterson said calmly, "was not the real will. Mr. Mitchell believed his documents were being watched, so he created a fake one to throw you off. I remembered Dad's note. Be patient. He'd known what they were doing, and he found a way to outsmart them." "The trust has clear rules," Mr. Patterson said, raising his voice over Victoria's yelling. "The house can't be sold unless the trustee agrees. Everyone living there now can stay, but they must help pay for its care." Olivia laughed bitterly. "You want us to pay rent? To her?" "Not rent," I said, finally understanding. "A fair share, like a real family would." Mr. Patterson gave a small smile. "Exactly. James wanted this to be a home for everyone, but only if you could live together like a true family." "This is ridiculous," Victoria said sharply. "We'll fight this." James wasn't thinking clearly. The will was signed in front of 2 doctors who said he was completely aware of what he was doing. Mr. Patterson said, "And with all the evidence he gave us, I don't think a court will be on your side." I reached into my pocket and touched Dad's note again. "The lighthouse." "Mr. Patterson," I asked, "did my dad leave anything about a certain place?" He nodded and pulled out one last envelope. "He said you'd ask about the lighthouse. This is for you. Open it there." Victoria's face went white. "The lighthouse? What's there?" "I thought about the times, Dad, and I went there to remember Mom, to talk and be close." "What had he left for me there?" "I guess I'll find out," I said, taking the envelope. I looked around the room as everything changed. Victoria and her children's plans were falling apart. Dad hadn't just protected me, he protected the idea of what our family used to be before they tried to erase it. His last words echoed in my head. Be patient. He hadn't just meant to wait, he meant that the truth would come out. As Mr. Patterson packed up his things, he glanced at his watch. "The lighthouse closes at sunset," he said quietly. "If you're going today?" I nodded, holding the envelope tightly. Whatever Dad had left for me there, I knew it would matter. And I was ready. The lighthouse stood tall against the setting sun, its white walls painted orange by the fading light. I parked my car in the familiar gravel lot, the envelope from Mr. Patterson heavy in my hands. 20 years of memories washed over me, Mom's laughter, Dad's stories, the peace we'd found here before Victoria changed everything. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a key and a letter in Dad's handwriting. "My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I planned. The key opens the lighthouse keeper's office. I made arrangements with the Historical Society years ago. Look behind the blue painting of the harbor. I'm sorry for the pain you've endured. When I married Victoria, I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you a complete family. By the time I realized my mistake, she had already begun isolating us, using my grief over your mother to manipulate both of us. But I never stopped watching, never stopped planning. Every cruel word, every scheme, every attempt to push you away. I documented everything. The evidence is all there, behind that painting, along with something else. Something Victoria never knew existed. Your mother and I had a dream for you, long before she passed. We wanted to protect you, to ensure you'd always have a place to call home. The lighthouse wasn't just where we scattered our ashes, it was where we built your future. I love you, sweetheart. Never doubt that. Dad. I climbed the familiar steps to the office, my heart pounding. The key slid perfectly into the lock. Inside, the blue painting hung exactly where it always had, a constant through all my visits here. Behind it was a wall safe I'd never known existed. The combination was easy. My birthday, the same numbers Dad had used for everything important. Inside, I found a thick folder and a smaller envelope. The folder contained exactly what Dad had promised, years of documented evidence. Photos of Victoria tampering with our mail, recordings of her threatening the household staff, bank statements showing how she'd slowly siphoned away Dad's assets into private accounts. But it was the smaller envelope that made my hands shake. Inside was a deed and a partnership agreement dated 2 years before Mom's death. They had bought the lighthouse and the surrounding property through a private trust, converting it into a historical site with one condition, that their daughter would inherit the position of trustee on her 32nd birthday. I was now the owner of not just a family home, but a piece of history that had been mine all along. My phone buzzed. Victoria. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she'd say. Threats, demands, attempts to negotiate. But she had no power anymore. The evidence in this safe would ensure that. As the sun set, I walked out onto the lighthouse balcony, the same spot where we'd scattered Mom's ashes. The sea breeze carried the same salty sweetness it always had. And for the first time since Dad's death, I felt peace. We did it, Dad, I whispered to the wind. We really did it. The next morning, I called Mr. Patterson. Within a week, Victoria, Olivia, and Marcus moved out of the family home, their dreams of easy inheritance shattered. The evidence Dad had gathered ensured they couldn't contest anything without risking their own exposure. I turned the family home into a sanctuary for single parents transitioning through tough times, naming it after my mother. The lighthouse became a museum, sharing not just maritime history but stories of love, legacy, and justice. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I climb to the lighthouse balcony and think about patience. Dad taught me that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come to those who hold on to their truth and never let go of love. Victoria and her children eventually moved to another state, their perfectly crafted facade crumbling under the weight of their exposed lies. But the story people tell now isn't about their cruelty or defeat. It's about a father's love, strong enough to reach beyond death and right the wrongs of years past. The lighthouse still stands, its beam cutting through the darkest nights, guiding ships to safe harbor. Just like Dad's love had guided me through my darkest times, leading me home to the truth that had been waiting here all along. And on my mom's birthday each year, I scatter flowers from the balcony, knowing that somewhere, both my parents are watching, proud of the daughter who learned to be patient, to be strong, and to believe in the power of a love that never dies. Some people say they hear laughter on the lighthouse steps late at night, a man and a woman sharing jokes and dreams about their daughter's future. I like to think it's them, still watching over this place they created for me, still celebrating the justice that finally came to light. In the end, it wasn't just about winning or losing an inheritance. It was about preserving the truth of what family really means, not the perfect facade that Victoria tried to create, but the messy, loving, authentic bonds that withstand even death itself. Now when I look at old family photos, I don't see what I lost. I see what I gained. A legacy of love, strength, and the kind of patience that moves mountains. Or in this case, reveals the truth hidden within a lighthouse, waiting for exactly the right moment to shine.